Okay, how's it going, everyone? We got Jack again here and Greg for this podcast episode, and we're just going to dive right into the news here, unless you guys have anything you want to cover before I get into my little spiel.
No, nothing in
No, just
particular.
hi.
Okay, show. All right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen here. And first thing that we're going to dive into is some international news and domestic news here. And something that I thought was interesting was that a public school district in Beverly Hills is deciding to display an Israeli flag. I don't think this is going to be right away. I think that what they're proposing is a month of Jewish Israeli awareness. So kind of like Black History Month, there's going to be a Israeli month now or a Jewish month. I'm not really sure exactly how they're framing it. But the reason that I bring this up is I think it's very interesting and that it's not going to have the intended effect that they're expecting and that there's going to be a lot of pushback to this. And I already see it online and that people are going to be concerned about why why our leadership is rallying around a foreign government and a foreign flag right now. And it does seem interesting to me that organized Jewish forces are trying to associate Judaism and intimately marry it with the state of Israel. And I think that Jews in general should be concerned about this. It's not in all instances that an individual Jewish person's interests align with the state of Israel. And so I don't really see any pushback from this from Jewish individuals at this point in time. And I don't know if I necessarily expect to, but if I was Jewish, I would find this concerning for a lot of different reasons. And even though I'm not Jewish, I find it concerning. But that's just my perspective. And again, this was actually just published 2 days ago, updated yesterday. And I see a lot of people online responding extremely hostilely or in a hostile way on both the left and the right to this development beyond kind of the evangelical Christians and um, Jewish people and people sympathetic to the Jewish state or the Israeli state. So just wanted to give a quick update on that I think this is going to be a significant development in the future here. And you see, actually, the district says it will display the Israeli flag during the month of May. And I think it's the month of May that is kind of this Jewish awareness month or something. Anyone got any comments on that, or we'll just move on to the next thing?
Well, the children will be getting quite an education in what it's like to live in an occupied country.
Yeah, I see this backfiring. I just feel bad for not necessarily feel bad. I'm getting concerned for the average Jew, which honestly I have a lot of antagonistic feelings towards Abrahamic religions and people who associate with them, and the fact that I'm getting concerned. I'm just like, how are the larger Jewish collective not recognizing these developments here? And I think they are to some degree, but maybe not the underlying sentiments that people are feeling around this. So I think these are concerning developments. That's just my perspective, though. But I eventually want to see a sit-down conversation between a lot of people, and really as a culture, us having more conversations around these developments, because I think when people just sit in silence, that's when some really hostile feelings can start developing, and we have no ways of really discussing them very easily in our current paradigm right now.
It's
So.
very tone deaf. I mean, given the mass death that's going on in the Middle East right now, and they're going to shove the flag of the secular state in your face. I don't know. It's just really,
Is it really,
is,
we hear that a lot, the secular state, but it's certainly the
well,
administration is staffed with a lot of radical religious people. So
right, right.
the administration is. So I hear the secular state, but then when I actually look up the people that staff this administration, especially more of the Israeli hardliners within, I believe it's the Knesset, right? Can anyone correct me? The Knesset, the Knesset,
Knesset, I think it's the
Knesset,
Knesset.
yeah, the Knesset. Particularly, I think the somebody to keep an eye on is the administrator of finance. I can't remember his exact position, but he is a very, very radicalized right wing uh, kind of Israeli evangelical, if you will, or Jewish evangelical, if you will. I don't think, it's obviously not the most appropriate way to frame it, but he is saying some pretty wild things about Palestinians and their long-term plans. It does seem like the state of Israel is pursuing something approximating the Greater Israel project, and there is going to be some degree of territorial expansion of the state of Israel. And I'm curious to see how that plays out for Gaza. I think that obviously has been reduced pretty dramatically to rubble, and that there's going to be new property built in that area. And Trump has openly already stated that he is going to play a role in that new development. And I think that the pressures are coming from the state of Israel and American Israeli Jews like Miriam Adelson, who I believe she gave like $100 million or something to the Trump administration. I think I'm accurate on that. I'd have to research it again. And she was in Trump in as soon as Trump got elected, Miriam Adelson and her gang were in Trump's office again and again and again. And so I wonder if that's, her camp is playing a role in shaping it. Because why would Trump want to have new development in Gaza? He knows the optics of that. We have no business being over there. And I just don't think this administration is aware of how passionately a lot of Americans want to detangle ourselves from the state of Israel right now. And we need a break here, and we need a break right now. And I don't know why we're just pipelining ourselves into what looks like disaster here between Israeli American relations. So it just seems like it's going to some seriously dark places here pretty quick. I could be reading the room totally wrong, but I think this is part of what I was talking about is having open and honest conversations about the state of things. And so that's my open and honest conversation. I'm really, really concerned about how this is going to develop. And I personally feel very powerful, passionate feelings around this myself. And I see how other people around me feel. But we'll leave it at that for right now, unless you guys have anything else you want to present about this.
I also think it's interesting that in these left-wing spaces, a lot of left-wing spaces are anti-Israel, pro-Palestine. And when they say that, one of the things they like to say is that being against Israel isn't the same thing as being anti-Semitic. They're kind of splitting the state of Israel from the feelings on Jewish people. And I find it interesting that the headline of this article is kind of doing the opposite. It's correlated the support of Israel for the support of the Jewish people.
Yeah, yeah, that's good insight, Jack. I have the same read on that situation. I've seen that on the left very commonly.
Well,
So
when you refer to it as the Jewish state, the Jewish state, the Jewish state endlessly, I mean, you can't hardly blame the general public for equating the two. Um, I mean, people would go nuts if you called America a Christian state.
yeah, and maybe we'll get into that another time because I think that a lot of the general public is, we're being told ethno states are totally off limits, and that is it's not even Israel isn't even approximating an ethno state. I mean, it's pretty openly an ethno state, where at least the Jewish Israelis are prioritized over anyone else. And if anyone wants to push back on me on that, I'm certainly open to hearing that. But that is the sentiments of the general public in America right now is we have openly recognized that for what it is. We've heard the arguments that the Jewish state is making. This is our only homeland. This is, all of these things happened in the past, and we hear it and we still just disagree with it though. If no one is able to have an ethno state, then certainly the people that kind of push that narrative on why Western countries couldn't be even prioritizing their native populations, then certainly the state that was heavily involved in that shouldn't be allowed to do that. So to me, that's really interesting is I think that international organized Jewry played a significant role in shaping people's perspectives around white nationalism and Western nationalism and creating something that approximates ethno states in Western countries. And then the state of Israel, though, is directly involved in that pursuit. That's not, we can't square that very easily. And it's hard to even have these conversations with people that support the state of Israel. Like we see this ambition, well, then why can't the German state, right, create an ethno state? And I don't think there's a great answer to that question yet. Um, okay, well, we can move on from this now unless anyone has any additional commentary. Okay, and we won't be on Israel all day, guys, but the next one, and this came up recently, and really the reason I'm bringing it up is not to just fixate on the state of Israel, but this is like major news that's coming out that people are talking about. So Republicans right now in the Trump admin is investigating Wikipedia over allegations of organized bias, and this is really in relation to the coverage of the state of Israel and how they're arguing that people are sympathetic towards the Palestinians. And I have to be honest with you, I mean, ultimately I'm sympathetic to the loss of all life, but I don't really look at the Palestinians in a favorable light either. And I'm not going to get into that too much right now, but um I think that in general, that is a very difficult and challenging people to um, integrate with, especially and particularly for Israeli Jews. So I understand the complexities there. I don't want to say like, oh, I don't understand, why this developed, and I don't think that the Palestinians and Hamas and everything is totally benign there. So I do want to say that as well.
Well, I mean,
But
you traumatize a people for more than a century, and I mean, this is a simple fact. You put people under extreme stress, they become religiously fundamentalist. They go a little nuts, and the history of terror attacks against the local Palestinian farmers and peasants goes back to the early 1900s, late 1800s.
I agree 100%. Yeah. And it's also though then like okay, now there's this hot they've applied pressure to the Palestinians. Now the Palestinians have applied pressure to the Israelis, and it's just this very violent feedback loop here where the Israelis are now like, well, all of these people from Hamas, which all the Palestinian, a large portion of the Palestinians supported, they've been running operations, terror operations on our people. So I think their perspectives have shifted because of that as well, where it makes them very difficult to take this approach where they're going to socially engineer the Palestinians out of the situation because that's what it's going to require. I mean, how are these people even ever going to live in peace together again? You can't have this type of conflict and have it resolve in a diplomatic way anytime soon. So it honestly seems like the most charitable option is to get the Palestinians out of Palestine. How could this possibly work long term with the state of Israel? I just don't understand what the long term solution is here. And I haven't heard anyone really discussing this. Like, how long term, how is it going to long term work out that the Palestinian people are going to remain in Palestine?
Yeah, no, I kind of tend to agree. Well, especially after the most recent orgy of violence, I don't know how you're going to get the two people to live side by side for at least a generation. Uh, and I agree
Right.
that there's I really don't like these Western activists who say, "Oh, the Palestinians don't want to leave; they need to stay." If I was in a concentration camp being bombed for 2.5 years, I probably would want to leave. Um, it's a bit, I don't know, there's something a bit almost imperialist about insisting that they shouldn't leave. I mean, they should leave, and then the state of Israel should be basically blockaded and uh, starved of resources and punished. Uh,
And let's not act like the United States has been any, I want to be careful about that, but they've approximated Israeli actions in the Middle East, in the Middle Eastern conflicts. I mean, we've indiscriminately killed civilians plenty of times. Um, the United States military has as well. Maybe, certainly not not to the same, maybe to the same degree, but not in the exact same situation as the state of Israel is in right now. We're seeing, and maybe though it just, and I didn't want to bring this up. I think that war is going to change in terms of civilian casualties here going forward because of the rise of social media and how easy it is to distribute this information. Um, to large amounts of people without having to go through this filter, like a mainstream filter first. So we're just able to distribute the raw footage and everything um, directly to the whole world, essentially. And it's having a really dramatic effect. I think 20 years ago, we wouldn't be hearing all of this. There would have been a narrative that they would have been able to craft about this, and it would have gone through the mainstream filters, and we might not have known the depth of what's going on in Palestine right now. But now, like the other day, we saw a double tap strike where
mm-hmm.
the IDF struck journalists. I think it was one journalist in particular who was pretty significant. Then the aid workers came to get the bodies out, and they striked the aid workers as well. And we could see it basically in like HD footage, these people just getting blown up. And I'm like, um, it's certainly not something that I would ever support, and our, government is supporting this state right now. And to be clear, I don't support really any of the American military conflicts either. And I've been open about that from day one. So I don't think we ever should have been in the Middle East. I don't think we should have been in Vietnam. And to be honest with you, I oftentimes will look down and speak down on even the veterans of those wars right to their faces. So I think I am being um, pretty reasonable and fair here from and what's the word that you use when you have the same consistency across the board? What's that called again? Like I guess just consistency. So I feel like I've kept my consistency here at least. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the only double tap drone strike they've done. Well, they blew up a girl fetching water. They blew up a 13-year-old boy, and then blew up the people that came to rescue him. Yeah, this is insane. I mean, this is the behavior of a completely rogue state run by insane people.
Yep. And so that leads into the next, and this is the last thing
Well,
I'll say.
really quick, I
Yeah.
think it's interesting. You guys were kind of alluding to it, but I think wars are kind of won or lost right now on social media. So it's who can weaponize the various things going on the grounds more to convince public opinion. As
Mhm.
in TikTok and the fact that there's a lot of Americans who think like you guys do and don't support Israel, despite the mainstream media, the US wanting us to. I'm sure the government considers that a threat to their national security. Like that's why they were considering banning TikTok and all these things. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if TikTok was being weaponized in this way to influence the US perception.
It and influence it like there were actors right now looking to, and it's on both, well, I guess really what you're saying, it's certainly on both sides. Like people are looking to take advantage of social media to present their perspective on these conflicts and shape the public's perspective. um and I think the state of Israel historically has been and their affiliated intelligence agencies. While being fair, most state actors are also doing this. In Russia, it's going on. In China, it's going on. The United States has been, propagandizing foreign countries for decades. So all of the states are doing this. Um, and so I think what's happening though is we're waking up to it at scale. And so that's an interesting development. Okay, next up though, last thing on the state of Israel. Appreciate you chiming in there though, Jack. Um, Majority of America, and this is just in one poll, and I don't really take these polls as gospel, but majority of Americans disapprove of U.S.-Israel military alliance. This was just published today or yesterday, I believe. Um, so Americans are less approving of U.S. support for Israel's military campaign against Hamas than at any point since the Israel-Hamas war began. Um, 60% of voters disapprove of the US sending military aid to Israel. And that's not necessarily saying, though, that they disapprove of the military alliance, in my opinion. So I think this is a little misleading. While 32% support additional aid. So, and you certainly can't take these polls as gospel, but I do think that that's based on like the conversations that I've had with people, that is fairly reflective of the state of affairs in my world and in my networks. So I'll cover on that. Next thing we're going to discuss very quickly is the 600,000 immigrants that the Trump admin has greenlit. And I don't know if there's no way that's like in 1 year, right? So I'm not sure over what span of time we would be bringing in this amount of students. Um, It's not immediately clear why the figure Trump cited was so high, more than twice the number of students. So is this per year? I mean, that's
I thought it was.
okay. Wow. So the total also has been falling in the past years. So why are they so invested in this? And I think it's partially business interests. Like they see a decline in enrollment from Native Americans or Americans that were born here, and the colleges want to just have more enrolled students, particularly the foreign Chinese ones that pay max tuition. So I'm really concerned here that this is a capitalistic business objective of state and private institutions or colleges, and that the Native American here, and by Native American, I mean an American that is naturalized here and has citizenship here and has lived here for a long time, I guess, this is going to negatively impact them. So Trump was saying we're going to wind down the immigration, and this seems like the opposite of that. And it's also from what they're claiming is a peer adversary of us and stealing all of our technology. And we're supposed to be really concerned about that, but we're bringing in double the amount of Chinese immigrants that we brought in the last year. I don't know, guys. Something is just really not adding up to me about Trump at all. He's like, oh, we're going to, control all these wars. We're going to make sure that Israel doesn't go off the rails. We're going to curb immigration. None of that's happening. And a lot of people on the right are talking about that. And this is something that's actually pretty concerning, guys, because the left is making all of these announcements like, oh, all these young men on the right, because that's partially why Trump won, is from a large contingent of young men who became popular with him that I don't think otherwise were going to be until they started investing and attracting that demographic. And Trump started going on certain podcasts like the Nelk podcast, the Nelk Boys, and things like that. Actually, it was said at the behest of his son, Barron, wanted Trump to go on more of these podcasts and attract more of the young male vote. And these young men, though, are highly in tune with social media and reading all of the material that's being distributed. And they're turning on Trump. And the left keeps making these articles that I see. They're like, oh, all these young men are running away from the right and they think they're going to the left, but they're just have become more radicalized. They're going more to, they're not, Trump isn't right enough for them. He's not radical enough for them. And that's absolutely what I see in my observations on social media is that all of these young men are not going to the left. They're not going to, and it's probably going to be Gavin Newsom in 2028, right? It's going to be Vance Newsom. I mean, people are calling that pretty early here. So we're going to have Newsom, the governor of California, as the 2028 Democratic candidate, and Vance as the Republican candidate. And these young men are they're kind of joking about going to Newsom, but not really. They're looking for a real usurper here, and a real right-wing radical approaching fascism. That's where we're at, guys. We're at where a lot of young men are approaching fascism here. So that's what I've observed. Maybe people have observed other things, but I just want to be the one to break the news here is that a lot of young men are very upset with Trump and they're not going to the left. They're becoming increasingly radicalized. And nobody's really trying to capture this audience and do anything about it.
I think the 600,000 students, I mean, th this is going to compete with American students for university slots. This idea that there's this business case that they need more students, I mean, I think colleges need to have a smaller budget. I think they need to go on an austerity program. Um, they need to get back to basic amenities. They need to stop it with the gourmet dining. They need to go to oatmeal for breakfast and soup and a sandwich for dinner. Um, and just get back to the basics of education. Getting them in, educating them in the specific interests of their career field, and then getting them out. Um, we used to have schools like this. They were called state schools and land grant universities, but their tuition has climbed very high, approaching the levels of private schools in recent years. Not quite, but gone way up in ways that don't serve the public interest, which was their entire mission statement, I thought.
Right, exactly. Exactly. All right, on to the next
Yeah,
piece of
the
oh,
current
go ahead.
administration, both in this bringing the students in, and also I remember a while ago there was a lot of talk about H-1B. It seems like this administration isn't anti-immigration. They just want a specific kind of immigration. They want, I
Yes.
guess, wealthy or high-skilled immigration.
Right. And so maybe anti-illegal immigration, but they're really not there's not a substantial push to control the illegal immigration, in my opinion. Yeah, there's steps being taken, but we're going to still see high waves of illegal immigration here. And and the Trump admin isn't looking to kick out any immigrants. And I don't know if I necessarily even believe that. I want to propose something interesting. Um, that I don't think is going to get any support, but it's something I've been wrestling with in my mind. What about just locking in with everyone, every citizen that's here, or even every immigrant, even every illegal immigrant, citizen, and saying, hey, this is going to be our population. This is going to be the makeup of our country right now. We're just going to give everyone amnesty and say, hey, everyone that's here right now can stay. But no more immigrants are allowed in for the most part after this period. Virtually none. And we go into a very isolationist mode here. And the only way that substantially more immigrants can come is if we hold a national vote. And so we hold a national vote, and if the majority of people say, hey, we want to allow more immigrants, then we structure it again that way. And I think there's going to be a lot more restrictions and it's not going to be as many people let in, but we would allow more open immigration at that point. But yeah, I think that could, in my mind, that presents an actual type of solution to this issue where we don't have to run people out of the country, which would get really inhumane and cruel very quickly. But we also need to control immigration long term here. The makeup of this country is dramatic. Like I want real deal Americans that are nationalistic and patriotic and want to serve the interests of America, and not the opposite, where we're this extremely divided nation where we're being told that diversity is our greatest strength. And I'm not talking about strictly the color of your skin. I'm talking about your ideals and your cognitive frameworks and things like that, your psychology. We are not one united people at all right now. There are factions emerging. We're totally fractured here, totally fractured as a people. And there's many different players vying for different interests. This is not, I think, how a really successful country is structured, where we don't have this unified vision and we don't have these unified objectives for our people to strive towards, and we don't have any sort of unified identity right now. And it could just me be, that's something that I want to strive for. Whether it's realistic or not is something different, but that's something that I'm actually really sensitive towards and something that I would love to see come to fruition. And I think for a lot of people, it's a lot more important than they commonly recognize. But that's just my
I,
perspective.
the problem with what you mentioned earlier about doing an amnesty and then sealing the borders is that this was basically the premise of the 1986 Simpson-Mazzoli amnesty. Um, this was the premise of something that happened before already, and the enforcement end never happened.
Right. Fair enough. And so I just don't know how this is. I mean, we're being told that this type of great replacement isn't happening, but we see it right in front of our faces. I mean, look at what's going on in all the Western countries. Look at what's going on in Canada. Nobody can control immigration right now, and it's basically just open field day. I mean, are you seeing all of that on social media? What's going on in the UK? What's going on in Canada? They have
Canada has a Canada
increasing
has
him.
a
All the public is aware that immigration needs to start being controlled, and the legal immigration is increasing. The illegal immigration is increasing. So, what's going on here? Like the general public is recognizing this needs to start being controlled, and the government bodies are increasing the rate of immigration. So, this is not adding up. I don't see this I don't see this being able to be solved very civilly long term. Well, maybe in terms of a civil war, it could result in that in a civil resolution. But okay, on to the next topic because we don't have too much more time here. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go to this story where an Australian boy died last week, following his early childhood circumcision. And I at first thought he died of anesthetic complications, but now that I've read this more, I see that that's not the case. So it's absolutely vile and disgusting. But this physician here, Doctor, would you pronounce this Ray Ad or Rad? Raw Ad?
how's I'm just opening the article right now.
RAAD, Ra'ad. Dr. Ra'ad Hassan failed in his professional duty of care when he did not take adequate steps to safeguard 2-year-old David Flynn, who died just hours after the operation at a medical clinic. And this was all the way back in 2021, interestingly enough. So it just that's crazy how long that took. That's seriously crazy. David and his 8-month-old brother Joseph were circumcised at the request of their mother, Alice Flynn. And Dr. Hassan administered morphine to sedate David, describing it as routine, but chose not to sedate Joseph because of his age. So the child that died was not sedated, interestingly enough, to any degree. And then, although David was heavily sedated and unconscious, and Joseph was bleeding and in visible pain, both boys were discharged with their mother. So I wonder potentially if Joseph he was probably put into a circumstraint, but I wonder if he was just jostling around too much. And that's how the complication happened, right? He wasn't sedated. He was basically just openly being tortured, experiencing penile torture. And he wasn't sitting still because if you look at it here, um, it looks like a damaged frenular artery. So I think we're talking about the frenulum directly. His frenulum was severed and he bled out essentially. So seriously, guys, the most disgusting way to go. And I want to let you know that under my administration, we would invade Australia at this point, and all of these people would be arrested, and many, many government figures would be arrested as well, right? It's open knowledge now in many parts of the world that this is flagrant genital mutilation. And a lot of people are responsible for these bone-chilling, predatory offenses on children. And there is really just not going to be, I think, the mercy that people are expecting there to be, right? This is the highest order of atrocity, and with that comes the highest possible order of discipline. So these people better hope that we do not get into administrative power here.
Yes,
Anyway,
it does appear that he bled out of a damaged frenular artery. Um, it's important to remember there are major blood vessels in the penis, the superficial and deep dorsal veins of the penis, the frenular artery. So when you start cutting there, people can bleed to
very
death
quickly.
very, very quickly. And well, we'll get into this. There's a comment here I wanted to read.
Yeah, maybe you could share your screen as well. And we have 2 minutes. I do want to start this again though. So
Yeah, we may have to patch this together, but this is a good.
yeah, I agree. This was a better episode. And for me in the morning is actually kind of in my prime time spot too. So this is a great time for me.
I think it's interesting how the author of that article thought to write it that way. And it's really telling to where the current cultural sentiment is at on this issue. As in, the kid had an elective invasive procedure for cosmetic reasons. It was an elective procedure, it wasn't medically indicated. And the takeaway was, oh, the doctor didn't do the proper safeguarding during the procedure. How can I don't understand how anyone who's writing an article about this thinks that and doesn't think why did the elective procedure happen at all? The cognitive dissonance that most people have is so incredibly far from my own personal mental model. I just don't understand it at all.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us are in the same boat. And I would go as far to say, like, why do we even consider it a cosmetic procedure? Why do we consider it even an elective procedure? This is at face value just felony sexual battery on a minor. So it's like that's the lens that we really need to be moving towards, that this isn't even a medical procedure. This is just battery of a child. And that's really the extent of it. I mean, it goes beyond that even more. But certainly, we're presenting this person is presenting that in the most charitable lights it could ever be presented in. And I think people are worried about the implications of presenting it in any different light, because the downstream implications of that are going to be pretty profound very quickly, in my opinion. Um, we are going to have to start a new one more time.
Good.
Okay, so back on this Australian circumcision victim article, Greg found an interesting comment in this article. Greg, do you want me to read it again or you want to cover it?
You can read it. It doesn't
Okay,
matter.
yeah. So this comment says, I worked for a very well-known charity. I remember a woman who couldn't speak English and her 11-year-old son handing me a note. It read, I come to the country 2 weeks ago. I want your charity to pay for my 11-year-old son's circumcision. And I was horrified to think they came from the Middle East and automatically expect our charities to give them everything. Anyway, it turns out there is funding for this type of procedure provided by the government. And the reason why is because these backward Stone Age people will just get the job done by a backyard quack. And if taxpayers don't provide it, or if us taxpayers don't provide it, funny thing is, us taxpayers have to pay private doctors to have it done. I just remember looking at the young boy and feeling very sorry for him.
And I just find this interesting because, and I have heard this before, this harm reduction argument where, oh well, we have to keep this male circumcision legal, male child circumcision legal, because otherwise it'll be done with a rusty razor blade. Um, and this is fascinating because then shouldn't that logic apply to FGM, which we're told is much more dangerous and much worse? The harm reduction argument would be that much more potent. I actually don't necessarily think FGM is more dangerous. I suspect MGM is much more dangerous because it cuts across the superficial and deep dorsal veins of the penis and the frenular artery, and you can bleed out very quickly in the acute sense from severing these major blood vessels. So I've always found this harm reduction nonsense to be extreme bad faith.
Absolutely. I'm in total dis or agreement with that. And yeah, something that just really eats away at me is that a lot of these people in countries where circumcision um, doesn't dominate, or in other words, the majority of people are not getting circumcised, there is a sizable amount of people who openly recognize it as mutilation of children's genitals and just have complete tolerance towards it, it seems like, or they're not willing to challenge it in any meaningful way. And I just think that unfortunately is an extremely poor representation of them. And it's not I don't really feel a connection with people like that. And I don't really feel like we're working towards an equitable society with people like that who are willing to essentially throw children under the bus to be genitally mutilated because they're not willing to intervene or take a stand on it. And you certainly could say, oh, it's unreasonable for me to feel that way, but I feel very, very differently, and that this is really an expectation that we should have from people in our society for the basic, these are people who concern themselves in so many different matters of equity typically, but they're not concerning themselves with flagrant genital mutilation of children. And if we can't provide that type of safeguarding to people in our society, preventing genital mutilation or standing in opposition to genital mutilation of children, then what really are we trying to stand for here as a collective? Um, I just feel like it shoots a hole in their whole framework if they can't take a stand on something like this. Like, oh, you're going to take a stand on climate change, but not the mass genital mutilation of children. You're going to take a stand on the pink tax, on um, inequality in wages between men and women, but you're not going to take a stand on genital mutilation of men. So there's something really, really off about that I feel like doesn't get the attention that it deserves. That basically everyone should be an intactivist. And if you're not, that's a really serious problem and a profound flaw in your moral and ethical frameworks. That is 100% my perspective is you should be in complete ideological opposition to mass genital mutilation of children. And if we can't come to a consensus on that and agreement on that, um, we're not in the same collective and the same society and the same people anymore, is what it feels like to me. I feel very, very different than people who do not take a stand on infant genital mutilation. I didn't really articulate my position super well there, but it feels like there's a really big divide between myself and these individuals who recognize it as genital mutilation but are not intactivists about it. And I'll leave it on that from my perspective right now.
You're speaking of a general apathy in non-cutting countries, especially like non-cutting Western countries on the issue.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I don't want to talk about what Christopher Columbus did anymore, right? And how the white man is just an absolute piece of shit in every regard, in every domain. And I want to talk about the mass genital mutilation globally of children, right? So all that other shit that everyone's talking about doesn't have much concern or relevancy to me while children are being raped and mutilated in mass around the world. So why concern ourselves with Epstein when there's mass genital mutilation going on all around us that has profound downstream implications? I mean, I'm really making an argument that this is the number one objective of our world right now is to the abandonment, criminalization, and disciplining of mass child genital mutilation. And I think there's a really strong argument to be made there.
Yeah, I mean, worldwide, I think maybe malaria probably kills a few more people, but there probably should be precedence given to like harms that are human inflicted, because this could actually be ended immediately, just by not doing it.
Yeah, and I do
So that
wonder
it
about the
probably should
downstream
be.
implications of also, the harm that's being done, but having a population of people, sometimes the majority population that suffered early infancy penile trauma and how that can shape their psychological frameworks in negative ways. So, do we want a world where the majority of men in this world have suffered from pretty extreme genital violence in their early childhood period? I think there's a lot more to that than even us intactivists give credit to. But I'll let Jack go here because I see.
You were speaking about some of these other social issues, like how some social justice movements don't like, I guess is one way to put it, they don't like white men. And I think for or Christopher Columbus or all these other issues, and I think you need to look at the consequences of how all those issues decide to engage. And if the consequence is that the voices of the victims on the circumcision issue are getting decentered and we're not included in the social justice landscape today, then I think that makes all of those other social justice issues complicit in the power system that allows this to continue. And I think it makes them incredibly problematic in this way. And I think they need to reevaluate themselves entirely from the ground up, such that they're completely incapable of participating in such wickedness ever again. As in, I think all these systems that are not centering our voices or are trying to, even if they agree with us, rationalizing it, like that comment in the article was. It's like, oh, it's better to do it this way because it's less likely to be done very unsafely if we fund it with government dollars and do it in the hospital. Um, all of those voices, I think it's by design. As in, the system is kind of designed to keep us down today, to decenter our voices, which allows this to continue. That's the only reason we made it so far. That's the only reason it's 2025 and there's still circumcisions going on all across the world. It's because the entire system has completely decentered our voices and prevented us from speaking and being the center of attention on this issue.
Well said. And I'm really concerned that, I mean, I'm getting radicalized by this. I think you brought up an interesting point where the social justice landscape and the social justice networks, they are oftentimes very hostile to people who look like us, or particularly, in my opinion, straight white men. And I actually brought this up on a Facebook comment recently with, interestingly, David Llewellyn, who is a circumcision lawyer, who made a comment about or made a post about DEI and and how that needs to persist. And my perspective of that is that DEI and affirmative action in many instances, and in my personal experiences, it felt weaponized against me. And that whole social justice landscape felt weaponized against me, both the policy itself and the people who came in to enforce that policy. I felt extraordinarily ostracized by them. And I would say it was anger at times, but the real, I think, underlying feeling was just abandonment and heartbreak, and that's what caused the very angry feelings around it. But yeah, I felt totally disrespected and abandoned and pushed aside by the entire social justice apparatus, um, entirely. And my communication with people in that space was always very negative when I brought up routine infant circumcision, unfortunately. So I'm wondering how we reconcile with these groups. I think a lot of, even I've heard men that are say they're feminists, when they've engaged with feminist, like intactivist feminists who are men engaging with feminists, they're like, there's something really, really off here about how we're treated on this particular issue. And the gaslighting that we get, and really the condemnation that we even get at times, obviously is completely unacceptable. And I'm wondering how we reconcile this with all these social justice groups. And I don't know if anytime soon they're going to be willing to entertain what we're saying at all, and bring us into the feet into the loop here, and bring us into their communities and having us work together with a common front. I just don't see that happening anytime soon. And I want to maybe continue to try it, but it feels like a slap in the face even trying to work with these people anymore. And I'm much more inclined to build up a grassroots internal group of afflicted men that want to just begin advocating and controlling this situation rather than working with existing social justice groups that have disrespected us and kicked us out of the arena, in many instances that I've experienced and witnessed. So, and particularly straight white men who want to advocate against this. So in my opinion, there is basically, I don't even want to say reverse racism. I don't want to use that. There's just straight up open hostility, overt hostility towards straight white men in many different institutions. And unfortunately, it has radicalized a lot of straight white men. And they're not accepting of your framing of the social justice groups where, oh, because your ancestors, because you were born into white families, you had all this privilege. Number one, there were a lot of white men who didn't feel like they had this privilege at all and were on similar, in similar places as the quote unquote minorities around them. So what a lot of us experienced is unfair advantages being given to minorities and straight white men just getting fucked and having to just witness this affirmative action and negative tone policing and just straight up hostility towards straight white men. And I want to say I was really sensitive to this the whole time, and it's radicalized me in a game-changing way, and I'm becoming increasingly racially conscious. And the reason I'm becoming racially conscious is because I feel like I need to protect my interests. So this whole social justice landscape and DEI and affirmative action, it created racial consciousness where it wasn't previously present in a significant amount of straight white men. And now for a lot of us, we don't even want to get to make things equitable anymore. We just want revenge. And so that's something that I'm concerned. And I see that with a lot of other straight white men. We were in institutions and in social justice landscapes that treated us very poorly. And it was very overt and it was very hostile. And now it's like all of that goodwill has been rooted out of me. And I just want to um, create the same framework oppressing them now. And I don't think that's right, but unfortunately, that is how I feel right now. And so, anyway, long story short, the reason I bring all that up is because I don't want to work with these groups anymore that had overt hostility towards me. In fact, I want to run them out of the room entirely in a lot of instances. So I don't want them, I don't want to work with them. I don't want them having any share of the pie. I just want them gone. And obviously, that's not the way that we should be approaching this, but that's how I feel at the moment.
Yeah. I think it's super interesting because not only was I mutilated, but also I'm not taken seriously in any of the conversations that I have about this topic. I'm not taken seriously in the discourse, and I'm not taken seriously at all in the social justice landscape. So it's kind of a double whammy. Like I honestly don't even know which one is worse. Like not only am I going through this incredibly traumatic personal thing, but the system doesn't listen to me or take me seriously at all. And it almost doesn't matter to me what the reason for that is. It's like these other social justice issues that don't center men in the discourse or want to actively decenter men or whatever these typical leftist spaces like to do. I don't care about what their reasons are for why that was justified, for why in their conception I don't deserve to be the center of the social justice landscape. You just have to look at from my perspective, just look at the consequence. I went through this incredibly traumatic thing, and now I can't talk about it, and I'm completely alone and no one takes me seriously. And when I try to bring it up to get any form of justice, no one listens or cares. It's just and every time that happens, it's just so incredibly re-traumatizing. It's like I was personally sexually violated, and then nobody cared. What is going on? And all the reasons for that just don't make any sense to me.
Absolutely, yeah. And the last thing I want to touch on is I was like a social justice warrior, totally on the left my whole life. And then when I had my own problem that I wanted to bring up, total abandonment by all of those institutions, all those people spoken down on, and it completely radicalized me. And I see a lot of some men in a similar position that I'm in now. So unfortunately, that is the case. So, but yeah, I appreciate all that commentary there, Jack. That was good
I,
stuff. Anything you want to
I,
comment on, Greg, or?
I think in response to what he said, it's not just that they don't care about your suffering. It's that they actively oppose you. I mean, they gaslight you. They oppose you um, at many different levels. I mean, Carter had his uh, city council outreach project and was basically stonewalled at a certain level. And then, you know, one group that's been really bad about this, I mean, that I can say for certain has actively opposed us in getting public recognition for this is the the anti-FGM activists. They will actually attack you.
And to a
How
lesser
dare
degree,
you?
the
How
intersex
dare you
activists as
compare?
well.
Well, that's a whole.
It's a
They
whole,
hitched their horse to a completely different wagon. You know,
yeah,
they they should have gone in with some sense of basic bodily autonomy, physical integrity, but instead they went in with weird social justice stuff, uh, sort of aligned to the FGM, actually more aligned to like LGBTQ kind of stuff. They sort of painted it almost like a different sexual identity, which I think was a huge mistake. I mean, first of all, it's
yeah.
not, it doesn't get to the fundamental wrongness of intersex genital
You're
mutilation.
right. Now that I give that, reflect on that more, that was a really interesting framing and approach that they went with. I just didn't untangle that initially, but I think there's a lot of substance to what you're saying that I'm going to give more, consideration to and think about more because I wonder what shaped their strategy. Like, I wonder if, um, partially like they were being influenced in that way to pursue that direction because they didn't want this to be tied to circumcision in any meaningful way and the realities of what infant circumcision is.
I tend to believe that was a part of it. That if they focused on the bodily autonomy, physical integrity aspect, uh, you know, intersex might affect allegedly maybe close to 1% of the population. Uh, Circumcision affects half the population. In theory, could affect half the population. Um,
Even if that strategy to not mention the circumcision quote unquote works, or if it convinces people or lowers the rates, that's not, I mean, that's in some ways interesting to me, but that's not really satisfying to me. As in, you're even if we stop doing this to more children, that's never going to undo what was done to me. So at this point, I want justice and I want power. I want personally power for myself and I want power for the other victims. And having this go slowly into the night or like talking around it in a way that doesn't empower the victims here is really disturbing to me. That would be completely unsatisfying to me.
Well said, yeah. And ultimately, I think what we want is the ability to influence and have some level of control over clinical medicine practices, because this is all under an umbrella here. The intersex injuries and the, you know, foreskin amputations. Um, that needs to stop. And it doesn't seem like that's going to organically come from the physicians and the nurses and the whole clinical medicine apparatus here. And they're saying, oh, we can, control ourselves. We can set policy ourselves. We can kind of run the show ourselves. And I think the blunt reality is that they can't. And there needs to be external influence that begins controlling their behavior and their practices. And okay, guys, yeah, if the parents say they want to mutilate their child, you're the authority here that needs to say absolutely no and actually report them to the police. These are people that need to be reported to the police, and there possibly is going to be criminal discipline for even attempting to pursue mutilation, genital mutilation of their child. So, yeah, I think that this is just such a bad look for these physicians trying to present themselves as like these beacons of health and say, and not necessarily safety, but like these upstanding citizens in our communities doing the highest level of work, charitable work. The reality is very, very, very different, unfortunately. It's very perverse and violent. And these are really the exact opposite types of people that they're portraying. And they're involved in unfathomable levels of wickedness here. And some of the most egregious injuries that are happening to children in our country. I mean, I would say these are people who are actually involved in more harm, oftentimes, these pediatricians and these obstetricians, than they are involved in helping people. They're doing more bad than they are doing good. And that's an argument, and there's different points to make there, but the fact that they could be involved in harm at such scale, such severe harm at such scale, I think, should really jeopardize their reputation and their image. And we unfortunately just can't put faith in them at all, actually. And under my administration, they wouldn't be working anymore. They would no longer be allowed to be physicians. It's such a breach of their duty and the relationship that they should have with their patients, that not a single person involved in this would be practicing ever again. But whether that's going to materialize in that way or not is something different. But and one thing I want to touch on, like all of these regret parents and parents that know that this is genital mutilation, they just keep going to these physicians. They keep going to these pediatricians. They keep going to these OBGYNs. And it really bothers me that they're openly aware that these people are mutilating children in mass and just continue taking their children. It's like, oh, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? Um, I don't necessarily have the answers for that, but nobody's even trying to put any serious pressure and opposition on these physicians, and particularly not the parents. Like, there's no commentary that they leave. It's just open season with us right now.
This idea that the medical field should be totally self-regulating is so strange to me. I mean, it's actually quite offensive. We live in this thing called a democracy where the people actually get to set rules for all sorts of different aspects of life. I mean, your profession isn't really exempt from it. I don't see why it would be or should be. We regulate many other professions, accounting, financial advising, engineering. So of course medicine, and we already do it. We already do it with FGM. We do, you can't perform any surgery you want on a child or people in general because we have FGM laws. You can't prescribe any medication you want to people because we have the drug schedule. Now you can argue that some of these things are good or bad ideas, but the point is we do live in a democracy. Um,
Right.
Interestingly, though, the democracy is wrong now, as in if you polled the average person, they would not agree with us on this
Yeah.
topic.
Something that popped into my head too is that democracy is working against us right now, actually, or would work against our interests. So,
Possibly, but I mean the idea that the medical field should be an entity unto itself which is the argument. I mean, that is basically,
Right.
I have heard that before.
Right.
I think we need to throw out the whole thing today, the entire medical system, and start from the ground up. And it should be redesigned in a manner where such wickedness is never possible again. The fact that this was even possible to happen at all points to an
A
incredible.
catastrophic flaw in the whole paradigm. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
A
100%.
total system failure at all levels. I mean, the medical field, the government, the media, the institutions, civic organizations.
Right.
Another thing I wanted to note, I suspect that the intersex lobby hitching themselves to this sort of alternative sexual identity probably has something to do with the perceived success of LGBTQ advocacy in the
Mm,
past decade or so. Um,
yeah, I'm with you on that. Once there was profit incentives um, for physicians, I think that they got on board a lot quicker. Okay, there is some
and
additional React content that I want to share here. And
and
this is
as
from,
far as I know, things have not, the recent push for intersex sort of identity is maybe 7 or 8 years old, and the most recent big push I've seen. And I don't think they've actually made very big inroads. Like I think the doctors are still doing it with
yeah,
pretty
they
much
are.
no consequences, with
Totally.
no hesitation, basically. So
Yeah.
it's very instructive because this is what happens when your movement is not founded on firm moral philosophy.
Right. Okay. So next up, there's this post in the circumcision. Man, I actually that's a shame. I meant to invite this guy to this discussion actually because I reached out to him. I was trying to invite him to the Discord server. This particular poster owned food, and what kind of oh yeah, he was upset. I said the N word in the one of the last videos. Not necessarily upset, but he's still willing to have a conversation here. So I actually am going to send him an invite to the next discussion that we have because I think he's commenting in the circumcision grief subreddit quite a bit and he brings up interesting points and he's saying that and this guy is kind of it's interesting because he is kind of I don't know if he's a feminist, but he's not necessarily a men's rights activist. He gives consideration to a lot of different viewpoints, but he is recognizing, and something I think a lot of us recognize, that there are just straight up man haters in intactivist subs. And I don't know if you guys have really recognized this and other online spaces. And he says here, this has been building up for a while, and I'm sick of pretending it's not happening. There are too many man haters in intactivist spaces, and it's actively undermining the entire cause. I don't know if I'd fully agree with that, but I think he does have a point here. Let's be clear, intactivism exists because men have been mutilated, silenced, and ignored for generations. The whole point is to fight for bodily autonomy and to speak up for male victims who were never given a choice. But if you look around some of these subs, you'll find people who just clearly despise men, who twist every conversation into an excuse to dump on them and outright erase their suffering. This is not progressive. This is not helping the cause. This is spitting in the faces of victims. Think about it. Men finally open up about the physical and psychological scars of circumcision, something society already shames them into staying silent about, and instead of support, they get snark, gaslighting, or even accusations that they're exaggerating and hating women. And this is in relation to some intactivists bringing up the unique dimension that women play in this practice, and there being virtually no tolerance for it. And this is very common in progressive spaces. They essentially will completely shield women from any responsibility in anything. And it's actually a severe deficit of progressive spaces that's starting to really like impact their ability to win in elections, in my opinion, is their open hatred of men and particularly straight white men, in my opinion, and their infantilization of women and their excuses that they make for maybe female specific behavioral patterns and decision making. So anyway, though, here it says, here's the truth no one wants to admit. Intactivism will never gain traction if it lets man haters control the narrative. I don't know if man haters are fully controlling the narrative right now. I don't necessarily if I agree with that. But I will say that our intactivist organizations and institutions um, do seem to oftentimes lean heavily female. And I mean, there's even, people that have mutilated children that are in leadership positions. And they're obviously going to be very sympathetic towards other people that have mutilated children. So I think they do at times help really tone police us or are involved in tone policing us. So this cause needs fighters, not cowards and misandrists. If it needs people who care about the truth, who center male victims, and who refuse to water down the horror of what circumcision has done to men and boys. What it doesn't need are people who hate men so much they'd rather distort reality than admit male suffering is real and deserves justice. And yeah, again, I think this is just a major, major problem with progressives and the majority of people on the left is they're just throwing all male issues under the bus. I do want to show actually an example of this. And this is really my own just personal struggle here with somebody. And I did kind of maybe go off a little too much on this person. But let me go share it here. They all laughed at me actually when I talked about DEI. And again, this is David Llewellyn's post on DEI saying, if you oppose DEI, you should have to use the full phrase instead of the letters. Be brave and say, I oppose diversity, equity, and inclusion. Bonus points if you admit what part you don't like. Making an acronym transforms it into a thought terminating cliche. From now on, be proud of your opinions, but be specific. So I said, I opposed the part where it was wildly weaponized against straight white men, and all you WASP liberal boomers ushered it in while having no idea how it negatively socially engineered our entire youth environment. And you didn't seem to figure it out, care to figure it out. Now everything is more fucked racially than ever. Fuck DEI policies. Three laughs at it. So that's what I get, including from this guy. Love that. I stand with Ukraine. He stands with the depletion of the male population of Ukraine. So he stands with all of the men in Ukraine being extinguished, being drafted and sent to their deaths. So maybe we should send David to Ukraine. I think he would do quite well there. Um, so everyone disagreed with me. Everyone laughed at me. The didn't earn it in the current administration are definitely mostly white men, not doing anything for the average white man. So I don't think this point has much relevancy as all of these white men seem against my interests personally. So the patriarchy, that's what we want to call it, just fucks me perpetually. So whatever this system is, I want it gone too. And then I just said, you're not addressing what I'm saying, though. There was and still is varying levels of a discriminatory landscape towards straight white men within education, academia, and certain industries. The left doesn't ever want to consider the full downstream implications of that. That is why the left lost in 2024. They had that in the bag and completely fumbled, partially because they pressed the pedal to the max on DEI policy. Democrats need to become a viable party again. We need real opposition to Trump and his legacy, likely Vance and Newsom next. A lot of the young men on the right are done with Trump, but they're not going to the left. What do you think is next? And then I get, yes, straight white men are so, so oppressed from David again, who comes up. And I just say, I'm not involving myself with a party that acts like I need to take a back seat and is antagonistic towards my identity. We get into many other issues, but the bottom line is that there are enough men like me that the left probably won't win again in 2028. So great strategy you guys got. Maybe got to fall back on your old tactics like pumping in more loyal immigrants. And then I blew up this morning on David again which came 4 hours ago, and I don't necessarily regret it, but it was a little antagonistic. And I said, yeah, straight white men are systemically oppressed within many institutions that are in the grips of the left woke regime. 100% accurate. And international organized Jewry played a huge role in this dynamic as well. Keep laughing and doubling down. I love to see it. Your ghoulish behavior only makes us stronger. And by the way, I was radically oppressed when I was sexually disabled in infancy by flagrant genital mutilation and then denied any framework to get justice. I don't ever want to hear about my privilege again, Jew. So we are going there with this guy. And if he wants to call out white men all the time, then we're going to get racially conscious about everyone's identity now. And
Sure.
this is my comment. Yeah, straight white men are systemically oppressed within many institutions that are in the grips of the left woke regime. That's 100% accurate. And international organized Jewry played a huge role in this dynamic as well. Keep laughing and doubling down. I love to see it. Your ghoulish behavior only makes us stronger. And by the way, I was radically oppressed when I was sexually disabled in infancy by flagrant genital mutilation and then denied any framework to get justice. I don't ever want to hear about my privilege again, Jew. And again, and this was relation to him saying to me that straight white men are so oppressed in a mocking sort of way. And this is common behavior from David Balanishki, not David Llewellyn, well, it's also common behavior from David Llewellyn as well. Um, so I don't know if you guys want to chime in on that to any degree, but obviously that's one example of how I don't want to say racial tensions because I'm not going to get that, but I think that their tensions are rising here, and white men who are told that they're advantaged in all these different ways and that they're the oppressors, they're going to start pushing back. And I don't think a lot of people are ready for the pushback. You know, we've been piled on as white men for some time here, and that's our perspective. And we're going to bring the heat back and, speak about other people's identities. And I don't really know what other solution I feel like I have than pushing back on other people in that way and letting people know that I am fully racially conscious now. And that was a paradigm that the left created in me, actually. And I was even fine getting replaced at first. And I was fine with the demographics of this country radically shifting where more immigrants were coming in. What I wasn't okay with is the open hostility towards white men and straight white men and this whole oppressor narrative that was thrown onto us. And so, just to be clear to everyone on the left, that is what radicalized a lot of people. So it wasn't even the fact that the demographics are changing. It's that you double down on what we consider to be overt racism towards white men, and that there are consequences towards that now we're going to have to deal with in making white men extremely racially conscious and feeling like they have to protect their interests, while the left is still calling us the oppressors and highly privileged. So we're in a very contentious environment, I think, at the moment.
I don't think he realizes the irony
I know, yeah.
that when he says and is like laughs in your face that your issues don't matter, that is the oppression. The
Yeah.
oppression is not getting taken seriously in the social justice landscape.
Yeah, and so I wonder how this is going to play out for the left because I mean they're creating a one-party system here where there's enough people now who feel totally turned off from the left, which I don't even want. I really am a progressive at heart. That's the worst part, the whole situation. Um, so they've turned away people who are naturally inclined to their way of thinking, and we're not coming back. So, and we're not going to Trump either. Like they pushed a lot of people to the right, but now we're not finding a home on the right either. So This to me is where things do get concerning, where I just feel like both sides are extremely problematic, and we need revolutionary action here to get out of this mess. And I don't
There,
think the left can self-correct at this point, I guess is also what I'm saying. I think they've doubled down and entrenched themselves too much in this oppressive narrative, and they can't do a paradigm shift quick enough for 2028. And I think I'm starting to see it with Gavin Newsom's campaign a little bit, his early campaign here. They're starting to try and target the white man a little more, but I think it's a little too late. And yeah, I think it creates a dangerous precedent where the Democratic Party is just not a viable party anymore in terms of national elections. And who knows, if that's actually the reality or not. But I don't want to see basically the right being handed a blank check to do whatever they want also. So I think there's good when there's this balance and there's um, this kind of natural competition here, but I just feel like the competition is eroding away, and the left isn't a viable party anymore to a significant enough of the population. So who knows if I'm correct on that or not? Obviously, they lost in 2024 though, and I don't see that correcting for 2028 and them being able to ideologically capture this audience that they lost, particularly because they're just doubling down on their previous rhetoric and their previous policy.
there's something very curious about David initially his initial comment saying, if you oppose DEI, you should have to say the whole acronym, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a very Marcusean concept of just totally dominating the language. Um, you know, you define certain concepts as being good, certain concepts as being bad, and then make it so your enemy is their positions are just default viewed as being evil, or their motives are in question. I mean, it's like having to get up and say I support smothering puppies or something like that. Um,
Right. We don't even we're ran out of the room for having any even limited opposition or presenting any alternative viewpoint is what it feels like to me.
well, just that the language surrounding the whole issue, you know, DEI, diverse. It's not about diversity or equity or include. I mean, inclusion is just a very nebulous word to begin with. It's basically about prioritizing hiring and college admissions based on things other than academic and job performance. I mean, at its core, that's basically what it is. But they put all these fluff words around it. So if you have a political opinion that isn't in agreement with it, it makes you sound like you want to smother puppies or something.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's a very interesting dynamic. Well, on my end, guys, I do have to wrap up here soon. I got about really 1 or 2 minutes. But is there any last minute comments that you guys want to make?
Greg was talking about the language policing, and I found language policing on this issue to be so pervasive that even in our own spaces, there's a lot of things I feel like will get policed or I can't say. Like if I want to say what happened to me was rape or something, people even in our own communities will say you can't say that. That's going to turn people away. But not only can I not say that, there's no replacement word. Then what word can I say to describe this with the correct severity?
Yeah, they don't allow that, and they have different motives in the your. I appreciate you bringing that up. And in the Your Whole Baby group, for example, in their Facebook group, and really across their entire brand, they don't like anyone using the word mutilation or rape, and they'll temporarily kick you actually from their Facebook group. But they're more focused on educating mothers rather than being representation, representing victims in any way. But, I brought up my own personal story and brought up, I feel mutilated by this, and they've kicked me from the group for like 24 hours. I'm like, are you guys serious? I can't even talk about my own personal story. And like, yeah, you can. You just can't, talk about the violent dimension of it. Can't bring up mutilation. You can't feel like you're violently harmed. I'm like, this is really draconian to me. Or no, you're not draconian, but it feels very oppressive, like a very oppressive environment where they're trying to prevent me from giving the full depth of how I feel about this to protect the interests of the mother, that protect the emotional well-being of mothers. And I think it's actually less about turning people off and more about protecting the emotional state of the people that are in the group that have mutilated their children personally. So
I feel
that's what.
if they don't even support victims communicating the extremity of their suffering, are they even really an ally?
It's yeah, maybe not an ally and that's where we're seeing this different. Like there's people who are in opposition to routine ritual infant circumcision and maybe want to see it abandoned, maybe don't even, are concerned about it even being criminalized though. And that's a very different crowd though than the people that are rallying around the men. But there's very few people that are actually even rallying around the men, the grown men who want some sort of justice, want some sort of acknowledgement of their suffering from the government and from society. That there are not too many people interested in that pursuit, and the people that are interested in the abandonment and criminalization for children, they don't seem to oftentimes have much concern for the grown men, adults that identify as victims, and they don't seem to have as much concern at all. So it is an unfortunate situation and development, but that is where we're at. There's
The
very, very
movement,
few people who are advocating for justice for grown men, actually.
uh,
Very few.
yes, the aspect of uh, compensation and restorative justice for the victims, for the adult victims, is really
I would argue
not
there's
been
just
well
hostility
represented within the
towards
movement.
towards me at times when I present that. Like people get how could you ever want, especially around the parents, they're and that's that's fair enough. People can present their own viewpoints, but it's like I just get ran out of the room sometimes bringing this up. But that's all I got for today, guys. Great conversation here. I think we covered a lot of bases, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Could I say one other thing?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
The comments on the Daily Mail article on the Australian boy that died case, they're actually quite positive. The
Yeah,
vast
that's
majority
true.
of them do agree with us. I just wanted to note that there was another comment I saw. My obstetrician told me, I have not supported you and your son all through this pregnancy to then inflict upon him excruciating pain. So there are doctors that know the difference, which makes it all the more important to
Yeah. Well, I,
the
I would argue
prospect
that
of
there's a
severe
lot of
punishment.
doctors. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
It makes it all the more important to have the prospect of severe punishment on the table for those that don't understand that.
Well, there's a lot of people who actually understand and they still just they know it's mutilation and they do it anyway at the parents' request. So I would say that the majority of doctors are starting to fall into that camp where there's open recognition that this is unnecessary, that it's violent, that it's a type of mutilation, and that doesn't need to be done. And they're doing it for quote unquote cosmetic rationale at this point. That's kind of an open knowledge in my perspective. And based on what I see, what these physicians are saying and things like that, they're open. This is open common knowledge. It's not even like this secret. It's just they're openly talking about it, how it's not necessary medically, and they're doing it anyway. They're even talking
Knowledge
about
is
there
not
knowing there
enough.
being sexual consequences and things like that, and they're still doing it.
Imagine that I knew that racism was bad and I was still racist. Does knowing help? No, it doesn't help.
Yep. So that's where we're at. I think it's honestly even, well, what if you knew that punching somebody in the face was violent and you just kept doing it? So at one point, there just has to be consequences for that behavior. And I don't think anyone's really willing to address that yet. And they're going to create all sorts of avenues for these people to weasel out of their responsibility here and their culpability, really, unfortunately. You're like, well, you don't know that everyone, didn't know these things. And some people were truly brainwashed. And unfortunately, as well, in a lot of the advocacy networks, there are nurses and sometimes even physicians that are actively circumcising children. And they're like, we just, we can't get out of this paradigm. It's our job and blah, blah, blah. I see that all the time in the Your Whole Baby group. And it just drives me insane. I always leave a comment, hey, just know that men are pursuing criminal discipline against people that are participating in this. And it doesn't matter, if you are against it or not. If you participate in this, we identify this as a criminal offense, and then I just get banned from the group for 24 hours. Typically what happens. So when I make it, because I can't make any oppositional comments really in those groups. It's very, very interesting there that not many people are talking about is in the Your Whole Baby group, there's just nurses and pediatricians that are mutilating children that come in there, and they openly talk about the fact that they're mutilating children or participating in this, and they obviously know it's mutilation, and they're just making a claim that they can't get out of this paradigm and system without losing their job. So the argument that I make is, okay, then you're going to lose your job. And that's the sacrifice you have to make. And think about the sacrifices that all of us are making. I mean, we're making this like at times our life objective to criminalize this and making profound personal sacrifices. So absolutely, I'm demanding that you quit your job and make that sacrifice. Absolutely. And they would be like, oh, I would never participate in slavery. I would never participate in the Nazi regime. I'd never, how could those people ever do that? They would 100% say that while they're actively mutilating children every day. So I can't square that and reconcile that, how they just openly know that this is wrong. They know historical precedents where people were involved in things like this, and people pass very severe judgment on them. And they just can't put two and two together, or can't get themselves to abandon their income stream. And I understand it is so difficult to do that, but that is honestly the bare minimum expectation. And I think a lot of intactivists would rally around them if they did make those decisions to abandon their career, if that was necessary, or find an opportunity in a different line of work or a different hospital, a different clinic, things like that. But maybe a conversation to finish up next time around. So got to wrap up for right now. But yeah, it was awesome chatting with you guys. We had a long one today. It was 40, more than an hour that we spoke. And I'm going to get this published here today or tomorrow. Probably today, though, once I'm done with work. Okay, I'm going to stop recording.